In this video, we take a look at the cubic right angle weave. Stay with me and I'll show you how. The cubic right angle weave is another chunky rope stitch, good for necklaces or bracelets. I'll leave a link in the description to my tutorial on right angle weave if you don't know how to do that already, or if you want a reminder. So let's get started. I take about an arm's length of thread and I'm using 4mm bicones. To begin, we pick up 4 beads and we slide those down, leaving about a 6-inch tail, and we sew back up through the first bead, pulling our 4 beads into a loop. We then carry on through 2 more beads, so that our working thread is coming out the opposite side of our tail. We've done our first unit. We want to add on our next unit. This bead on the edge counts as the first bead in our next unit, so we pick up 3 beads. And we're coming out of the bottom of this bead, so we sew down through the top. Pulling our beads into a loop and adding our second unit. We want to work our way through to this bead on the side. And now we're ready to add on our third unit. We pick up 3 beads. We're coming out the top of this bead, so we sew up through the bottom. And we sew through 2 beads until we're coming out of this bead at the side. Now we've completed 3 units, and our 4th unit will join the 2 sides together. So this will be one side bead of the unit, and this bead would be the other side of the unit. So we pick up 1 bead. We're coming out of the bottom of the bead on this side. So we come across to the bead on this side, sew up through that bead. We pick up a bead, and we're coming out of the top of this bead. We come back across and sew down through that last bead. We then pull tight, pulling those beads together, and our sides are joined. Now we want to join all 4 of these beads along the bottom. I sew through those 4 beads. And then back through that first bead, joining those 4 beads together. I then sew back up through that side bead. And I sew through these 4 beads on the top. And our first cube is done. Now we want to make our next cube. We're coming out of this bead here, and we want to pick up 3 beads to make the side of the cube. We're coming out the side of this bead, so we sew back through the other side. Making another unit. We continue and sew through the next bead on the next side. And the new unit will share this bottom bead and this side bead. So we pick up 2, We sew down through the side bead. We sew back through the bottom bead. And we continue sewing through the bead on the next side. Now we're going to put on our third side. Again, the unit sharing this bottom bead and this side bead. So we pick up 2 and we sew down through that side bead. We sew back through that bottom bead. And we continue through the bead on the next side. And now we have 3 sides on. And you can see we have the bottom bead and the 2 side beads from the first and last side. We're coming out of this bottom bead here, so we sew up through this side bead. And we pick up 1 bead, sewing down through the other side bead. Then we want to sew back through this bottom bead and up this side bead so that we're coming out the top. Now we're coming out the top, we want to join these 4 beads together. So we sew around through these 4 beads. And now we're ready to begin our next cube. This will be the bottom bead of our first side, so we pick up 3 and we sew back around through that bead, making a loop. Carry on and sew through the next bead. And our second side already has 1 bottom bead and 1 side bead, so we pick up 2 and we sew down through the side bead. We sew back through the bottom bead and we continue through the next bottom bead. Again, for our third side, we have 1 bottom and 1 side bead, so we pick up 2 and we sew down through that side bead. We sew back through the bottom bead and we carry on sewing through the next bead. And this is our last side, so we have our bottom bead and 2 side beads. We're coming out of the bottom bead. We sew up through the side bead. We pick up 1 bead. And then we sew back round through those 3 beads, down through the side bead, across through the bottom bead, then back up through that first side bead. We then sew through all 4 of these top beads, joining those 4 beads together. We make our first side by picking up 3 beads. We're coming out of this bead. We sew back around. We sew through the next bead on the next side. We pick up 2. We sew down through the side bead, across through the bottom bead, and on through the next bottom bead. We pick up 2, down through the side bead, across through the bottom bead, and then across through the next bottom bead. And our last side already has 3 beads, so we just want to add the top bead. We're coming out of the bottom bead. We sew up through the first side bead. We pick up a bead and we come across, sewing down through the other side bead, across through the bottom bead, and back up through the first side bead. We then sew through the top 4 beads, joining them together. Pick up 3, and we sew back round through that bottom bead and carry on through the next bottom bead. Pick up 2, sew down through the side bead, across through the bottom bead, carry on through the next bottom bead, pick up 2, down through the side, across through the bottom, and across through the next bottom bead. We sew back up through that first side bead, pick up a bead, sew down through the last side bead, across through the bottom bead, back up through the first side bead. We then sew around through the 4 top beads, joining them together. And to finish off, sew back through that first bead. And that's how to do the cubic right angle weave.